Truth said out loud is more dangerous than any weapon because it doesn't just wound one person, it destabilizes the entire structure, holding a lie in place. Weapons threaten bodies. Truth threatens systems. A bullet can be stopped with armor, distance, or authority. A sentence spoken at the wrong moment, by the wrong person, in the wrong room, can't be recalled or contained. Once it's heard, it spreads. It forces reactions. It exposes who is actually in control and who is pretending to be. Institutions survive on silence more than they survive on strength. They rely on people knowing what not to say, when not to say it, and who must never hear it. The real power isn't in orders barked across a room, but in the unspoken agreement that some facts stay buried. When someone breaks that agreement, even calmly, even without accusation, it feels like an attack. Not because the words are aggressive, but because they remove the cover everyone was hiding behind. That's why truth-tellers are rarely argued with at first. They're punished, labeled unstable, discredited, shamed. If the truth were weak, it could be debated. If it were harmless, it could be ignored. But when it lands cleanly, when it hits something real, the response turns physical or personal. Slaps, insults, threats, career-ending consequences. Not because the speaker is wrong, but because they're right in a way that can't be spun fast enough. There's a reason truth feels heavier coming from someone who doesn't raise their voice. Calm delivery removes the excuse of emotion. It leaves nothing to attack except the content itself. When the words are measured, the reaction looks unhinged by comparison. Authority hates that imbalance. It depends on appearing composed, rational, superior. A single honest statement can flip that dynamic in seconds, making power look childish and defensive. Truth also bypasses hierarchy. It doesn't care about rank, titles, or medals. It lands the same way whether it comes from the top or the bottom. That's terrifying in environments built on rigid chains of command. A truth spoken by someone below isn't just inconvenient, it's insubordinate by nature. Not because it breaks rules, but because it reminds everyone that reality doesn't need permission. Weapons in fights. Truth starts them. It lingers after the room empties. People replay it. They question their own silence. They wonder who else knows. Even those who punish the truth carry it with them. That's why retaliation is often immediate and excessive. The goal isn't justice, it's containment. Make an example. Restore fear. Rebuild the wall of quiet before cracks spread. What makes truth especially dangerous is that it doesn't need repetition. It only needs to be said once, clearly, in the presence of the right witnesses. After that, denial becomes performance. Every forced laugh, every aggressive dismissal, every appeal to decorum only confirms that something real was touched. The harder the pushback, the more obvious the nerve. People like to imagine courage as loud defiance or dramatic rebellion. But the most disruptive courage is simple honesty delivered without theatrics. No insults, no grandstanding, just stating what happened, what exists, what everyone knows but avoids naming. That kind of courage doesn't look heroic in the moment. It looks dangerous, awkward, inappropriate. It makes rooms go quiet. It makes powerful people lose control. Truth doesn't need allies in the moment it's spoken. It creates them later, quietly, inside the minds of those who heard it and recognized it. Even those who stayed silent felt the shift. Something changed. A line was crossed that can't be uncrossed. The room is never the same afterward. Neither are the people who tried to bury the words with force instead of facing them, especially when they realized that the truth didn't flinch, didn't retreat, didn't beg, and didn't disappear when challenged, but stayed there, steady, undeniable, waiting for the next move. Power hates being exposed in public because its strength depends on illusion. Not the illusion of force, but the illusion of control. As long as people believe power is calm, competent, and justified, it holds. The moment that image cracks in front of witnesses, power doesn't shrink quietly. It panics. Public exposure strips away the private tools it relies on, the closed doors, the selective storytelling, the quiet punishments handled out of sight. In private, power can negotiate, threaten, or intimidate without consequence. In public, every reaction becomes evidence. Every raised voice, every overreaction, every attempt to shut someone down is seen and remembered. That's why exposure is so dangerous. It turns authority into a performance, and not everyone is good at acting when they're caught off guard. What was supposed to look strong suddenly looks fragile. What was supposed to command respect starts begging for it. Public exposure also removes deniability. Behind closed doors, power can rewrite events later. It can claim misunderstanding, miscommunication, or exaggeration. In public, witnesses exist. Stories spread. Versions get compared. The narrative is no longer owned by the person at the top. Once that happens, control slips. Not all at once, but enough to cause fear. Fear makes people react badly, especially those used to being obeyed without question. That fear is why public challenges are met with disproportionate responses. The issue isn't the statement itself, but the setting. The same truth spoken privately might get brushed aside or quietly punished. Spoken publicly, it becomes a threat. Not because it's loud, but because it invites others to see what they were never meant to see. Power can tolerate dissent. It can't tolerate witnesses. There's also ego involved. Power convinces itself that it deserves its position, that it earned authority through wisdom, sacrifice, or superiority. Public exposure questions that belief. It suggests that maybe the emperor doesn't have clothes, and worse, that everyone can see it now. That kind of humiliation cuts deeper than any insult. It's not about being wrong. It's about being seen as wrong by people who were supposed to look up, not across. When power feels exposed, it often reaches for spectacle to regain control. Loud reprimands, public shaming, displays of dominance meant to reassert hierarchy. These moves are designed to send a message, don't try this again. But they often backfire. The harsher the response, the clearer it becomes that something valuable was threatened. Calm authority doesn't need to shout. Confident leadership doesn't need to strike back immediately. Overreaction reveals insecurity faster than silence ever could. Public exposure also equalizes the room. For a brief moment, everyone present has the same information. That levels the field in a way power finds intolerable. Authority depends on asymmetry, on knowing more, deciding more, controlling more. Exposure flattens that advantage. It invites judgment. It invites questions. It invites comparison between how power claims to behave and how it actually behaves when challenged. What makes this even more dangerous is that exposure doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be simple. A calm statement. A fact dropped without commentary. No accusations. No insults. Just naming what happened. That's often enough. Power expects rebellion to be loud and emotional so it can be dismissed. Quiet exposure leaves no easy angle of attack. There's no tone to criticize, no behavior to point at. Only the content itself sitting there, undeniable. Once exposed, power becomes reactive instead of strategic. It starts thinking short-term. How do we shut this down? How do we make this disappear? How do we make sure no one else tries this? In that scramble, it reveals more than it hides. People notice the shift. They feel the tension. They sense the fear behind the authority. Even if they say nothing, they file it away. Public exposure doesn't always topple power immediately. Often, it does something slower and more dangerous. It plants doubt. It reminds people that authority is human, flawed, and capable of losing control. It shows that silence isn't the same as agreement, and that obedience isn't the same as respect. Once that realization spreads, even quietly, power has to work harder to maintain its image, knowing that one more moment of honesty in the wrong room could undo years of carefully managed perception. Silence is enforced, not chosen, especially in systems that claim discipline, loyalty, or professionalism as their core values. People like to believe silence comes from agreement or respect, but most of the time it comes from fear and calculation. It's learned early. You watch what happens to the person who speaks out of turn. You notice how quickly their credibility is questioned, how their motives are dissected, how their career suddenly stalls. You don't need a direct warning. The lesson is delivered through observation. Enforced silence doesn't require constant threats. It survives on precedent. One example is enough to shape behavior for years. When people see that truth leads to consequences while silence leads to safety, they adapt. Not because they're weak, but because they're human. They have families, ambitions, reputations, and limits. Silence becomes a survival strategy, not a moral stance. What makes enforced silence effective is that it often disguises itself as professionalism. You're told it's about unity, about not undermining leadership, about handling things internally. These phrases sound reasonable. They even sound responsible. But they function as restraints. They draw a line around what can be acknowledged and what must be swallowed. Once that line is accepted, anything outside it becomes taboo, no matter how real or serious it is. Over time, silence stops feeling imposed and starts feeling normal. People forget that speaking was ever an option. They edit themselves automatically. They avoid certain topics. They learn which facts are safe and which ones carry risk. This kind of silence is efficient because it doesn't need constant enforcement. People police themselves and each other. A raised eyebrow, a quiet warning, a change of subject. The system barely has to lift a finger. The cost of enforced silence is cumulative. Each unsaid truth adds weight. Each moment of compliance reinforces the structure that demands it. People carry this weight differently. Some become cynical. Some become numb. Some convince themselves that what they know doesn't matter enough to risk everything. Others tell themselves it's not their place. All of these rationalizations serve the same function. They keep the machine running smoothly. Those who enforce silence rarely see themselves as villains. They frame it as maintaining order, protecting the institution, preserving morale. They point to chaos as the alternative. What they don't acknowledge is that silence doesn't eliminate problems. It just hides them. And hidden problems grow. They metastasize. They show up later in worse forms, with higher costs and fewer options for repair. Breaking enforced silence feels like betrayal to those who benefit from it. Not because the speaker is wrong, but because they're disrupting an agreement that was never truly voluntary. When someone speaks anyway, it forces everyone else to confront their own compliance. That's uncomfortable. It's easier to attack the speaker than to question the system that required silence in the first place. Enforced silence also distorts reality. When only certain stories are allowed, they start to feel like the whole truth. Contradictions are dismissed as anomalies. Patterns are ignored. People lose the ability to trust their own perceptions. If something feels wrong but no one else says it out loud, self-doubt creeps in. Maybe I'm misunderstood. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just how things are. That self-doubt is one of the most powerful tools of enforced silence. It keeps people isolated even when they're surrounded by others who feel the same way. Everyone thinks they're alone in their discomfort. Everyone assumes everyone else is fine with it. Silence creates the illusion of consensus, and that illusion protects those at the top. When silence is finally broken, the reaction is rarely calm. The system responds as if something sacred has been violated, not because rules were broken, but because control was. The speaker becomes the problem, not the issue they raised. Their tone is criticized. Their timing is questioned. Their character is scrutinized. Anything to avoid addressing the substance of what was said. And yet, once silence is broken, it never fully returns to its previous state. Even if the speaker is punished, something shifts. Others realize that the silence was never as universal as it appeared. They recognize the fear for what it is. They may not speak next or the time after that, but the spell is weakened. The idea that silence is natural starts to crumble, replaced by the quieter, more dangerous understanding that it was always enforced, that it always required effort, pressure, and consequences to maintain, and that without constant reinforcement, it begins to crack, slowly, unevenly. In the minds of those who are no longer entirely sure why they are still keeping quiet respect based on rank shatters under pressure, because it was never real respect to begin with. It was compliance dressed up as admiration. Rank can command attention, silence, and obedience, but it can't manufacture belief. It can't force trust. It can't create legitimacy when things go wrong. Under normal conditions, rank works smoothly. Orders are followed. Protocol fills the gaps. Everyone knows their place. But pressure exposes what was holding the structure together. When pressure hits, people stop responding to symbols and start responding to behavior. Titles don't make decisions easier. Stripes don't calm chaos. Stars don't explain contradictions. In those moments, people look for competence, clarity, and steadiness. If rank is backed by those qualities, respect holds. If it isn't, the cracks show fast. The same voice that once commanded a room suddenly sounds hollow. The same authority that once felt solid starts to feel performative. Rank-based respect depends on distance. It needs separation to survive. The higher up someone is, the more the system tries to shield them from direct accountability. Assistants filter information. Subordinates soften bad news. Protocol prevents uncomfortable questions. This distance creates an illusion of control. Under pressure, that distance collapses. Problems rise faster than they can be filtered. Decisions have immediate consequences. There's no time for ceremony. In that collapse, rank loses its insulation. What replaces it is instinct. People watch closely. They notice who stays calm and who panics, who listens and who deflects, who takes responsibility and who looks for someone else to blame. These observations happen quietly, often without words, but they matter more than any formal evaluation. Once people see that rank doesn't equal capability, the respect attached to it starts to erode, even if outward obedience remains. This is why pressure makes authority brittle. It removes the luxury of image management. Under stress, people revert to who they are, not who their title suggests they should be. Someone used to unquestioned obedience may react badly when challenged. They may raise their voice, assert their rank, or punish dissent. These moves are meant to restore control, but they often accelerate the loss of respect. They signal insecurity. They tell everyone watching that the authority can't stand on its own merits. There's also a difference between respect and fear that pressure makes impossible to ignore. Fear works when consequences are predictable and contained. Pressure makes everything unpredictable. When stakes rise, fear becomes unreliable. People still follow orders, but their internal loyalty shifts. They stop believing in the person giving them. They start doing the minimum required. Respect, even quiet respect, inspires effort beyond obligation. Rank alone never does. Under pressure, people remember moments. A leader who protected their team when it mattered. One who admitted uncertainty instead of bluffing. One who stayed grounded while others postured. These moments build real respect, the kind that doesn't need rank to survive. Conversely, they also remember who hid behind titles, who demanded deference instead of earning trust, who cared more about optics than outcomes. Rank-based respect also collapses when it's challenged publicly. In private, authority can rely on structure to reassert itself. In public, pressure strips that advantage. If someone lower ranked speaks clearly and confidently under stress, and the higher-ranked person responds poorly, the hierarchy flips in perception, if not in form. People notice. They may not say it out loud, but the mental shift happens. Respect migrates toward competence. This doesn't mean rank becomes irrelevant. It still shapes consequences. It still controls promotions, assignments, and access, but its emotional power diminishes. People comply without believing. They nod without agreeing. They wait out the authority instead of investing in it. That's a quiet kind of collapse, harder to detect, but deeply destabilizing. Pressure reveals that respect can't be demanded into existence. It has to be reinforced continuously through behavior, especially when things go wrong. Anyone can look impressive when systems are stable. Few do when they're stressed, exposed, and accountable. That's when rank is tested, not by how loudly it's asserted, but by how little it needs to be mentioned. Once people experience that difference, they don't forget it. Even if the hierarchy remains intact, something fundamental changes. Orders still come down. Salutes are still exchanged. Meetings still follow protocol. But underneath, respect has shifted from being automatic to being conditional. It now depends on what happens next time pressure hits, who rises to it, who hides behind their position, who earns belief without invoking authority, and who discovers too late that rank was never the foundation they thought it was. Calm confidence beats loud authority because it doesn't ask for permission to exist. It doesn't need to announce itself, escalate, or dominate the room to be felt. Loud authority relies on volume, repetition, and reminders of status. Calm confidence relies on presence. One fills space, the other settles it. When tension rises, people instinctively gravitate toward the person who seems least threatened by it. Loud authority is reactive by nature. It speaks quickly, interrupts often, and leans on titles or rules when challenged. It treats questions as threats and disagreement as disrespect. The louder it gets, the more it reveals its dependence on compliance. Calm confidence doesn't rush. It listens without flinching. It answers directly or doesn't answer at all. That restraint signals control in a way no raised voice ever can. In high-pressure environments, noise creates chaos. Commands blur together. Emotions spike. People make mistakes. Calm confidence cuts through that. It slows the moment down. It gives others something solid to anchor to. Even silence, when paired with steady eye contact and composed posture, can redirect a room. People stop posturing. They wait. That pause shifts the balance of power without a single word being spoken. Loud authority often mistakes fear for respect. People comply, but their focus narrows to self-protection. They stop thinking creatively. They stop offering honest feedback. They do exactly what's required and nothing more. Calm confidence invites participation without demanding it. People speak up because they feel safe doing so. They take responsibility because they trust the person leading them won't collapse under pressure. What makes calm confidence so effective is that it's hard to attack. There's no obvious weakness to exploit, no emotional spike to provoke, no defensiveness to poke at. Loud authority thrives on reaction. It needs resistance so it can crush it. When none comes, when the response is measured and grounded, loud authority loses momentum. It starts to look excessive, unnecessary, even childish. This dynamic becomes especially clear in confrontations. A raised voice tries to force a win through intimidation. Calm confidence reframes the situation. It changes the rules without announcing that it's doing so. Instead of escalating, it clarifies. Instead of defending, it states. Instead of pushing back, it holds its ground. That steadiness unsettles people who rely on dominance. They're used to controlling the emotional temperature. When they can't, they lose leverage. Calm confidence also signals competence. People assume that someone who isn't panicking understands something they don't. That assumption carries weight. It buys time. It creates credibility before evidence is even presented. Loud authority, by contrast, suggests insecurity. If someone truly has control, why do they need to keep proving it? Why the constant reminders of power? Why the urgency to shut things down? There's a reason seasoned professionals speak less, not more. They don't need to fill silence. They know when to let others talk themselves into revealing information. They understand that composure under pressure is a form of communication. It says, "I've been here before. I know how this plays out. I don't need to rush." That message lands deeply, especially with people who have learned to associate calm with safety. In public settings, calm confidence is devastating to loud authority. Witnesses compare reactions instinctively. One person escalates. The other stays level. One demands respect. The other assumes it. The contrast does the work. Even if the louder voice technically outranks the calmer one, perception shifts. People start reevaluating who they trust, who they believe, who they'd follow if things truly went wrong. Calm confidence doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean backing down or avoiding conflict. It means choosing responses deliberately. It means knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the heavy lifting. It means not needing to win every exchange to maintain authority. Loud authority is fragile because it has to defend itself constantly. Calm confidence is resilient because it doesn't feel under threat. Over time, people remember how someone made them feel under pressure. They remember who steadied the room and who destabilized it. They remember who reacted and who responded. Loud authority may win moments through force, but calm confidence wins trust, and trust outlasts any single confrontation, especially in environments where stress is unavoidable and composure is currency. where the ability to stay grounded when everything else is loud becomes the clearest signal of real strength in the room. The moment bullies realize they misjudged their target is the moment control slips out of their hands. Bullying depends on certainty. Certainty that the other person will shrink, apologize, or break. Certainty that power will flow in one direction and stay there. When that certainty collapses, the bully doesn't just lose dominance, they lose orientation. They don't know which move comes next because the script they rely on no longer works. Bullies are pattern readers, not thinkers. They scan for weakness, hesitation, and the need for approval. They escalate based on feedback. A flinch invites pressure. Silence invites more. Compliance confirms the hierarchy. When none of that appears, when the target stays steady, responds calmly, or refuses to play the expected role, the bully stalls. There's a brief pause where confusion shows through before anger takes over. That pause is critical. It's the first time the bully realizes they may have miscalculated. The target isn't afraid, isn't impressed, isn't destabilized. That realization hits hard because bullying isn't about strength, it's about leverage. The moment leverage disappears, the bully is exposed as someone performing authority rather than embodying it. Misjudgment threatens a bully's self-image. They see themselves as dominant, respected, untouchable. Discovering that someone they dismissed can withstand pressure forces a reckoning they didn't consent to. Instead of recalibrating, many bullies double down. They get louder, meaner, more public. This escalation isn't confidence. It's panic disguised as aggression. Witnesses feel this shift immediately. They may not articulate it, but they sense something has changed. The bully's moves feel excessive now. The target's composure reframes the interaction. What once looked like control starts to look like cruelty. What once felt justified starts to feel personal. Perception tilts, and bullies are deeply dependent on perception. When a bully realizes they've misjudged their target, they often try to rewrite the narrative. They attack credibility, motives, tone, anything that moves attention away from the original interaction. This is damage control. The bully isn't trying to win anymore. They're trying not to lose publicly. The target's calm presence turns every overreaction into evidence. There's also fear underneath the aggression. Fear that others are watching closely now. Fear that silence from the target doesn't mean surrender, but restraint. Fear that one wrong move will flip sympathy entirely. That fear makes bullies sloppy. They contradict themselves. They overexplain. They reach for authority instead of argument. Each move reveals insecurity they worked hard to hide. Targets who remain steady in this moment gain something powerful. Not dominance, but credibility. People trust those who don't need to prove themselves. The bully's misjudgment becomes visible in hindsight. Others replay the interaction and notice details they missed before. Who interrupted? Who stayed composed? Who escalated? Who didn't? These observations linger. This moment is also dangerous for the bully because it can't be undone. They can punish. They can retaliate. They can isolate the target afterward. But they can't erase what people saw. The mask slipped. The imbalance was revealed. Even if the bully maintains formal power, informal authority weakens. People comply differently after that, with less belief, less loyalty, less emotional investment. For the target, the realization that the bully misjudged them doesn't require triumph or revenge. It requires restraint. Overplaying the moment can reverse the shift. Calm endurance keeps the focus where it belongs. On the bully's behavior, on their reaction, on their loss of control. The power now lies in not needing to use power. Bullies rely on isolation. They assume their target is alone. When that assumption fails, when others start to recognize the pattern, the bully's reach shortens. They become cautious. They pick safer targets. They avoid direct confrontation with the person who didn't break. Misjudgment teaches them a lesson they hate learning. That not everyone is afraid of them. This realization also plants a seed of doubt that doesn't go away. Even if the bully regains composure, they remember the moment their tactics failed. They remember the lack of reaction, the steady gaze, the refusal to submit. That memory undermines future confidence. They may still act dominant, but something underneath has shifted. The The most unsettling part for a bully isn't being challenged. It's being seen clearly. When their target doesn't respond as expected, it forces that clarity. The bully sees themselves reflected without the distortion of fear. Loud, reactive, exposed. That image lingers, especially in environments where reputation matters and composure is currency, where every future interaction carries the memory of the moment they picked the wrong person, pressed too hard, and revealed more than they ever intended to show.